Hi, welcome back to the channel and my ranking for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So I recently went back through and watched and reviewed every single movie in the series. It's been loads of fun making these. I hadn't seen these movies in the longest time. So it's been fun to go back through them again and see how my opinion and my perspective has changed over the years. And it's really great to see that you guys still love these old movies as well. I got a lot of nice comments. We've had some fun discussion on these movies. So really glad to see you guys have enjoyed these videos I've made as well. So going to finish up here with a ranking. Who doesn't love a good ranking video? So going from the worst to the best. Of course, this is just my subjective ranking. A few of my choices here will probably raise some eyebrows, no doubt. But feel free to leave in the comments all of your disagreements with me and all of your thoughts on the franchise as well. So I'm not going to go into these in too much detail. As I say, I have reviewed them all, and I can leave links and all that sort of stuff at the end if you're interested in hearing my further thoughts on any of the particular films. So just my brief thoughts here. So anyway, let's get into this ranking. So at the bottom at number 9, I've got Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. So I've never really liked this movie, but I did try and go in this time open-minded to see what they were trying to pull off with this sequel. And I just feel like it's such a bizarre experience. It's impossible to kind of get on board with, because I feel like the tone is all over the shop in this one. They tried to set it up as almost like a parody of Nightmare on Elm Street. It's very comedic in nature. Freddy's very cartoonish. And if you can get on board with that, I can kind of understand some people enjoying it. But then in the latter half, they've got all these very dark and serious subplots about the origins of Freddy. And these are ideas which I think could have worked perhaps in one of the earlier sequels done right. But within the context of this movie, it just feels so bizarre to me. Very difficult to invest yourself in this one. It's a mess of a film, really. I feel like there was too many different creative forces working on this one. And I assume by a certain point they knew it wasn't working, but had to run with it anyway, just to get the thing finished. And that's probably why you get that really horrible rushed ending as well, which is definitely the worst aspect of the film. So not a good sequel, and it was definitely sad to see the mainline story of the franchise go out like this. So at number 8, I've got Part 5, The Dream Child. And this is an interesting sequel because it does feel like the filmmakers cared about the project and actually wanted to make a good movie. And there are some creative scenes in here, like if you look at the dream sequences and all that kind of stuff, there's some really cool stuff that I think if you watch in isolation, you can appreciate on that level. I just feel like as a cohesive whole, the movie doesn't work particularly well. I don't really like the storyline here. It's not a very interesting or intriguing story. And I think the direction is just kind of unpleasant to watch as well. So if it's not interesting and you're not having fun with it, there's nothing really left here. And I also think the characters they brought in to accompany Alice here as well are really poor. Just bad acting as well. Just became very distracting for me. So whenever you're not watching a dream sequence here, I find it very noticeable how badly the movie is executed. So as a whole movie, I don't think it really works. As I said, there's a couple of good moments in here, and I can understand some people getting some enjoyment for this film. But whenever I get to the end of this one, I just find myself thankful that it's over. So from here on, I would actually say I like all of the movies. I gave them all at least a 3 out of 5. So I will definitely go back and watch these ones again out of choice, not just binging the franchise. But number 7, sorry to the fans of it, because I know a lot of people love this film, but I'm going with New Nightmare. And New Nightmare, I definitely think, is a really unique and interesting concept. And not just now, but if you look at it at the time that it came out in the 90s, when horror definitely had a bit of a slow ending towards the 80s, it desperately needed spicing up, and I do think Wes Craven's New Nightmare did that. And I do think you can see a lot of comparisons to what he did in Scream, what he did a lot better in Scream in my opinion. So I do appreciate the movie on that level. It is a very cool concept. But I just think now watching it again, once you get past the idea of it all, the execution of the movie itself leaves some to be desired, I think. I don't think it has a particularly good atmosphere. Like in terms of what you expect coming to an Elm Street film, it doesn't really have that charm, I don't think. and it doesn't feel like a horror movie to me. Too much of it is shot in broad daylight. I didn't really get that invested in the whole storyline with Heather Langenkamp and her family. Some of it felt a little bit contrived to me. I didn't like the child actor. That was another thing that was distracting. And then even when you get to the final act, it goes back into your typical Elm Street finale, but it's just nowhere near as well done as some of the other movies. So I appreciate it for what it is. I get why people like this one, but for me, watching it now and kind of seeing it on repeat watches, I feel like it's not quite as special as I thought it once was. Next up at number 6, I've got Freddy vs. Jason, and this movie's just a lot of fun to watch, I think. It's not overly ambitious. You know, they did find this cool idea for bringing these two horror villains in to go up against each other, and I like the way they handle that. To be fair, I actually remembered the film being more shallow than it actually is. I did remember the fight scenes and the metal soundtrack, which, you know, I enjoy all that stuff. It's all good fun. But I forgot they do actually have a couple of really interesting subplots in here, like the whole thing about the medicine that's kind of suppressing the memories of all the children to kind of keep it at bay, and anybody that starts to remember Freddy, they kind of have pulled away and locked up in this asylum. Just some really interesting, cool ideas here, which I think if this had been another movie, you could definitely have made another good sequel about that particular plot line in itself. So some cool ideas here. And the movie, as I say, is just a lot of fun, though. At the end of the day, it doesn't outstay its welcome. You do get to see the two villains coming up against each other, fighting, totally over the top, really gory. Nice casting in here as well. I think the characters are good fun. Nothing too deep, obviously, but it's just a fun movie. Can't really fault this one for what it's trying to do. At number 5, I'm going with Part 4, The Dream Master. And I'd say of all the movies, this is probably the one that's gone up the most for me. I had a lot more fun with this one than I remember having. And I think it's just because I really like the cast of characters here. I actually think they're really charming and have a nice chemistry with each other. Like a lot of people, I am frustrated about them replacing the actress that played Kristen, obviously losing Patricia Arquette when she was a very talented actress and kind of really brought a lot of personality to that character. It's a shame they had to change that up, because here it does feel distracting at the start when it feels like you're following a completely different character. So that is definitely a bit bizarre. But I think once you get past that and just accept how the story was playing out here and get into these new characters, I actually think the movie is just a lot of fun. And whilst I don't like necessarily they took a comedic direction for the franchise, I do think the movie is quite funny. You know, Freddy's got some really dark, funny lines in this one. There's a lot of creative dream sequences as well. It's all very colourful and wild to look at, so you can appreciate it on that level as well. And, you know, there's a ton of plot issues in the movie, plot holes, inconsistencies, contrivances, and if that stuff annoys you, I can definitely imagine you not liking this movie. But for me, in terms of pure entertainment and a nice way on an evening to kill 90 minutes. Again, like with Freddy vs. Jason, I don't think you can go wrong with this one. At number 4, I've got Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. This is probably the one that varies the most on people's rankings because it's such a bizarre film. It's definitely the weirdest in the Nightmare franchise. Obviously, it's kind of infamous now for being one of the most gay horror films in history, with all the kind of subplots they put in there and all of the makers of the film pretending they didn't know they were doing that. Totally bizarre, but very interesting to kind of read about in retrospect. But the bizarre nature of the film and the whole tone of it is kind of what makes it intriguing to me. Like, there's so many scenes in this one that make no sense whatsoever, but I just find it kind of fascinating to watch. And there is some really good stuff here as well. Even when the logic isn't adding up, I do think some of the scenes in themselves are very creative, they're very well done, they've got a nice atmosphere. And yeah, for some reason with this movie, I'm always just gripped watching it. I'm always kind of watching it thinking, what the fuck is this? What are they doing here? What was the purpose of that? But I just can't take my eyes off the screen. I'm just kind of enjoying the experience of it. So I definitely understand. This is another one that I understand people really not liking. But for me, whenever I come back to revisit this one, I'm always looking forward to it because, as I say, it's just such a strange sequel. Number 3, I'm going with the remake. And another controversial one here, but I actually quite enjoy this remake. I've kind of been up and down with it in the past. I have seen it a number of times, but on this recent rewatch, I found myself getting really invested in some of the storylines here. I think the way they handle the characters kind of looking back into their past as they start to piece together certain things in their memories, working out that they all know each other and how they've repressed all these thoughts. I actually think that side of the story is really quite engaging and quite gripping. So I appreciate what they were trying to do with this one. I do agree with some of the criticisms that people have, recreating a lot of the scenes from the original, but with really dodgy looking CGI and stuff. I do get that stuff is distracting and off-putting. And the movie obviously is nowhere near as original. I definitely don't think it has the charm that the original has. But if you can appreciate it for what it is, I do think on some levels it does work quite well. It's a much darker and more twisted version of the movie as well. The way they kind of portray Freddy here is a little bit different. And I think that probably puts some people off. But I actually think now, watching it again, being open-minded about it, I actually think it's quite a decent remake and definitely worth another shot if you've only seen this once previously and didn't like it. Number 2, I'm going with The Dream Warriors Part 3. Definitely the most popular sequel, I think, of the whole franchise. And I really like this movie. You know, I've seen it a number of times in my life. And it's definitely the standout of the sequels, I think. It wasn't Wes Craven directing, but he did come back in to have some creative control with the story and everything. And that definitely shows here. It's much more focused, I think, than a lot of other movies in the franchise. And I just really like the storyline here, doing something a bit different, getting all these kids together in this kind of psychiatric hospital, and seeing the connection between them and how they all having these dreams of Freddy. And I just really like kind of following along with this story. Really like the main character of Kristen as well, Patricia Arquette. I think she really brings a nice bit of mystery to this character, and yeah, she's just intriguing to follow along with. And I love her connection with Nancy as well when she's brought back into the storyline. So a lot of things about this movie work really well, and I do think they got a nice balance here of the horror with the kind of comedic side of Freddy, where they started to know that he was a very popular personality almost at this point, and the way they blended it here, I actually think works really well before they started to take it too far the other way in the later sequels. I definitely don't think it's a perfect movie. I think the final section is a little bit weaker. Like the way they get rid of Freddy in this film, I think is a little bit lacking. It doesn't quite have the punch that I remember when I watched it this time. But overall though, I do think it's a really good story as a way to kind of have another sequel. I like the characters here. There's some great visual effects as well. And this movie's just a lot of fun. It's definitely the standout to me of the sequels. And I get why people love this movie so much. And got a great soundtrack as well to boot. But easily at number 1 for me, it is of course the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Such a fantastic movie. I love this one to death. And it's just such a great concept, such a creative idea, and so well handled here. Like, you totally get now watching this film, like I've seen so much horror throughout my life, and this is one of the few horror movies that always is at the forefront of my mind. Something about the idea and the execution of it is just absolutely iconic. There's a reason why now, even over 40 years later, whenever you talk about horror films, this is one of the first to be mentioned. It really is a masterpiece of horror, I think. Despite its flaws, you know, it was limited in way. It was a low budget film, and you know, because of that they couldn't get the best actors in the world, the best effects, everything. But with what they had, I just think they did an absolutely incredible job here. This movie in horror, I think, will always be talked about as one of the greats, and it's for a very good reason. It's just absolutely iconic. So yeah, one of my favourite horror films of all time, and easily my favourite in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So that is my ranking for the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Thank you so much, guys, to those of you who have been following along on all of these reviews and leaving comments for me and everything. It's been a lot of fun making these, so I'm glad you guys have enjoyed it as well. As I said, do leave down in the comments as well all your thoughts on the franchise. Let me know your rankings and all of that fun stuff. And also, please do consider subscribing to the channel as well if you've really been enjoying my content. So thank you so much for watching. Do take care, and I'll see you next time.